Sandy Jackson grew up in an ordinary family, and until she came of age, she didn't even think that one day she would become rich. Her mother, Gloria, paid virtually no attention to her daughter and spent all her free time looking for a husband. Instead of devoting her life to raising her daughter, she was always busy with one of two things: either organizing a huge wedding or filing for yet another divorce. Since Gloria always chose her boyfriends based on their wealth, she usually ended up with a significant part of their fortune after the divorce. Of course, in Sandy's eyes, it looked demeaning, so she made a decision early in her life to never stoop so low as to live at the expense of others. In order to achieve financial independence, the young woman got her first part-time job as soon as she started college. Even back at school, Sandy showed a clear predisposition to studying foreign languages, which gave her an excellent opportunity to become a successful translator. When she set out on her career path, the young woman took a lot of work home, and sitting late into the night doing yet another translation, she dreamed that one day everything would change and she wouldn't have to work so much. When things started going uphill and the demand for Sandy's services increased significantly, she decided to take on a couple of assistants. Now that they could cover a larger scope of the work, the income of their small organization increased significantly. Over time, Sandy opened her own agency that provided all kinds of translation services. Finally, she reached the level of financial stability she'd been dreaming of for so long. Unlike her mother, she didn't feel the need to get married in order to endure a painful divorce in a year or two. That's what Gloria Jackson would have done, but not her daughter. Sandy had a very different take on life and wasn't planning on getting married anytime soon. "Honey, it can go on like this forever. It's time for you to think about starting a family," Gloria said, who'd got married for the first time when she was only 22 years old. Sandy only shrugged her shoulders in response, and using her busy work schedule as an excuse, promised to think about her mother's words later. The young woman wanted to live for herself first, instead of rushing into a relationship. Sandy went to theaters and museums, had dinners with friends, and went dancing in nightclubs. One day, while celebrating her best friend's birthday, Sandy met a young man in the cafe. He was sitting at the next table. Despite the fact that the stranger was good-looking, his clothes made it obvious that he wasn't well off. The man was wearing faded jeans, a modest black shirt, and battered sneakers. Meeting Sandy's eyes, the stranger smiled and bowed his head. She was taken by surprise and even blushed a little, but then nodded in response. Then Sandy got back to her friends, who were busy with the celebration, and forgot all about the nice stranger. The evening was going great, and everyone was having a lot of fun. The celebration had everything: eloquent toasts to the birthday woman, dancing, and all kinds of fun. But all good things come to an end eventually, and with the onset of darkness, the guests started leaving the cafe. Since Sandy's car was in the shop, she decided to walk home. Fortunately, her house wasn't far from the cafe, so the walk would have hardly taken more than 10 minutes. But when Sandy went outside, she bumped into the same man who was drinking coffee alone and nodded at her a couple of hours ago. He was holding a huge bouquet of roses, the price of which clearly didn't match his appearance. "Here, this is for you," he said with a smile. "Thank you so much. They're beautiful," Sandy answered without hiding her admiration. The woman was very impressed by the stranger's gesture. Meanwhile, the man took Sandy by the arm and offered to walk her home. The woman gladly accepted his offer. As she found out a little later, the man's name was Spencer. Sandy's companion turned out to be a very well-read and educated young man, which immediately won her over. At some point, Sandy caught herself thinking that she didn't want her new friend to know that she had money. Especially since Spencer told her that he worked at the car wash located on the outskirts of the city. Moreover, Sandy understood that the man had to literally save every cent in order to provide himself with the basics. On the other hand, she was a self-made woman who worked hard to achieve everything she had in life. but she still didn't feel like sharing that information with Spencer. Sandy was afraid that the man would start treating her like a rich doll and wouldn't get to know the real her. Therefore, the woman came up with a simple story about how she came from out of town and was living with a friend now. But when Spencer saw the house where Sandy lived, his surprise knew no bounds. "Well, your friend definitely isn't poor. This house is huge, and this is a very expensive neighborhood. Yes, she has rich parents. They have a couple of farms in Iowa and a few hotels in New York, which bring them a good income," Sandy answered, trying to stick to her legend. Saying goodbye at the door of the house, the young people agreed to see each other again tomorrow. For Sandy, it meant that she would soon go out on her first date in life. All Sandy could think of the next day was Spencer. She kept checking her watch, but the evening couldn't come soon enough. Just as it was the day they met, the man came to their date with a gorgeous bouquet of roses. God, but these flowers cost so much money. Where does he get it? Do they really pay that much at the car wash? Sandy couldn't help but think, but she didn't voice any of these thoughts. Taking the bouquet, she smiled sweetly at the young man, which made his heart start beating frantically in his chest. The date went great. Just as the day before, they spent the evening talking about everything in the world and enjoying each other's company. However, Spencer talked very little about himself, and Sandy had to improvise all the time, trying not to get lost in her own story. Ever since then, the young people started seeing each other almost every day. The most interesting thing was that Gloria Jackson didn't even know the name of her daughter's boyfriend. Sandy knew her mother too well to introduce her to the man who grew up in a poor family. Therefore, the woman had to keep her relationship with Spencer a secret. Meanwhile, Spencer thought that Sandy moved to the city on her own, and thus didn't insist on meeting her parents. The only thing that never ceased to amaze Sandy was that despite his low income, Spencer continued to give her expensive gifts and bouquets of roses, which clearly cost more than his weekly earnings. Why am I being paranoid? Maybe Spencer simply takes extra shifts to be able to surprise me with all those gifts. The woman tried to reassure herself. Several months had passed, but Sandy was still unable to admit to her boyfriend that she wasn't really an out-of-town student, but rather a wealthy owner of a translation agency. And when Sandy finally decided to tell Spencer the truth, something unexpected happened. It all started with the fact that Spencer invited her to an expensive restaurant, which was rightfully considered one of the best in the city. Sandy didn't even suspect at the time what her beloved boyfriend had prepared for her. Sitting down at the table, the woman was stunned by the abundance of expensive dishes and drinks. "What does it all mean, honey?" was all Sandy could ask. "I want you to marry me," Spencer said, and handed the woman a velvet box with a ring inside. It was all so emotional that Sandy couldn't hold back her tears. Having a hard time keeping her excitement in check, the woman mustered up the courage and gave the man her answer. "I would love to marry you, but before I accept this ring, I need to tell you something important." But before she had time to say anything else, Spencer took her by the hand and led her to the exit. Out on the street, the man led Sandy to the expensive Dodge SUV that was parked outside the restaurant and cordially opened the passenger door for her. "What does it all mean? Whose car is this?" Sandy asked, not even trying to hide her surprise. Spencer's lips stretched out into a sweet smile, which puzzled his companion even more. Finally, having enjoyed the effect he had on his date, he said, "I don't work at the car wash, Sandy. In fact, I own it. Actually, I own a chain of car washes around town. My father is a rich oilman, and my mother owns a chain of beauty salons." Having heard Spencer's confession, Sandy was speechless for a moment. "I didn't want you to see me as just some rich man who would be able to provide a comfortable life for you. But you fell in love with me when you thought I was poor, regardless of my job and social status," added Spencer. But little did Spencer know that he was also in for a surprise. I wasn't completely honest with you either. In fact, I'm not a poor student. I own a rather successful translation agency," Sandy said with a mysterious smile. Only now did the young people realize that they both feared the same thing. "Looks like we're a good match. We've been dating for 6 months and didn't know the whole truth about each other," Sandy said, and feeling emotional, kissed the man on the cheek. Spencer smiled in response and invited his beloved to meet his parents. Sandy, of course, was glad to accept the invitation. Making her now fiancé promised that they'd stop by her mother's place on their way back. Having learned the truth about each other, the young people realized that it was time for them to move in together and start a life with no secrets, building their future relationship on love and mutual understanding.